Hi, Chris Peterson from Scale Model Homes. Today I'm going to show you in this tutorial how to build this 1928 Sears Vallonia kit house. This house was in Sears catalog from 1910 to 1940. There are thousands of the actual size homes throughout the country. They were delivered by rail car and each piece was individually numbered so you could build these on site. So today we're going to build this exact model, and by virtue of video editing I'll show you how to build this exact model. So let's get started. Okay, before we get started I use a mat on a hard surface. You're going to need an X-Acto knife or razor blade. I recommend an X-Acto knife. I use this tweezers for some small parts. They're a little easier to handle. I include an emery board for doing some light sanding. I also include a couple of these triangles. They're great for squaring things up. So these really come in handy to push the pieces together, keep them all square. You're going to need a lot of square parts when you're putting this particular model together. For painting, I use a little masking tape to mask off some of the areas I don't want to spray paint. You're definitely going to need some glue. I use this tacky glue. It's a little less runny than Elmer's glue. I think there's less water in it. It works fine. Elmer's glue would work fine as well, but I've been using this stuff for years. You're going to need a straight edge because we're going to cut some of the pieces out of the panels that we have. And finally, for painting, since I'm using the 1928 color photo that was in the catalog from Sears, I'm using that same color scheme. So I bought a couple of these paints. They're usually like $1.50 at the hobby shop. These are just acrylic paints. It's water-based paint. I did the siding in yellow. I mixed these two together for the shingles, and I used a napkin, paper towel, just to dab the paint on those shingles, which is nice. So you're also going to need a little paintbrush to do the walls, and I do the painting on just some newspaper, something to keep my area clean. When I do spray painting, which I will do for this particular model, I use some charcoal gray Rust-Oleum for the windows, the interiors. For all the trim work, I used a heirloom white. Again, Rust-Oleum makes a pretty decent product. However, sometimes these nozzles get clogged up, but it tends to work well. And then for using the foundation bricks, I used an enamel spray paint. And to call out the bricks, you don't necessarily need this. I used about a thimbleful of this stuff on the whole thing, but you spray a little of this, or actually you spread a little of this and wipe it off on the bricks, and it goes into the lines. It looks pretty nice. So other than that, I think we have what we need, so let's get started. There are 7 panels to this kit. The first one here is the trim work that goes around the windows and doors. This would be the left side of the house. This is the front, back, and the piece for the dormer. This is the right side of the house. This is the base with some roof supports. This piece has all the windows, doors, pieces for the porch. This is the foundational brick pieces and the brick pieces for the porch supports. This is the roof sections that you'll need. And finally, there are 3 sheets of shingles. So first things first, let's get a piece of newspaper. I'll take the panels with the siding. It has the front, back. I use this acrylic paint. It is water-based paint, so the wood might, since it is natural, it might warp a little bit, but that's okay. We can take care of that in a moment. So just dab this a little bit. and begin painting the exterior portion. I usually start with just a light coating, just to make sure I don't drown out the siding. And just add this as you go, and do another light coat if you don't have full coverage. Okay, that should do it. So as you can see, there's a little bit of warping going on with this wood. Acrylic paint does have a lot of water in it, so that might make this warp a little bit, but that's no problem. What we're going to want to do is, after it dries up a bit, take a heavy book and lay a heavy book on that overnight. Okay, now we're going to work on painting the roof shingles. So I just used a little bit of newspaper, protect my work area. Lay these out a little bit. I get some tissue, napkin, paper towels, anything that makes a good kind of a brush for dabbing. And because I'm using the original colors of the Sears house in the catalog I showed you, I'm going to be mixing a little bit of brown with a little bit of this orange. So I'll mix this together. And once this is mixed well, I'm just going to start dabbing this and try and get as much coverage as possible. One thing to keep in mind, since if you're going to be mixing colors, try and make sure you have enough paint to cover all three pieces, because it's really hard to get another mix the way you had it originally. You may need to go over this one or two times, but dab all the pieces you missed, and then continue doing that to the other two pieces. Next up, we need to paint the brick foundation pieces and the porch supports. So all these have a little tab at the bottom holding them in. It's typically right here at the bottom. So just flip this over and gently push through. Don't push too hard in the middle, as you might actually break the piece in half. So just go through very gingerly, knock out all the brick portions. You won't have a little label on the back like I have. Okay. Then when you're done, looks like we have them all. You're going to want to take the emery board I provided and sand off the tops and the bottoms of each one of these. Okay, now that we've got the pieces sanded, let's just get a little organized here. The longer pieces, of course, this is the chimney. These thin pieces are the columns for the front porch. And what we're trying to do is find just the pieces of foundation that all go together. These pieces we'll use for the columns a little bit later. So we try and take the long, narrow pieces for the columns. There's going to be a front, a back, and a side that are the same for both columns. And then there is, okay, so these are the foundation pieces. Again, just trying to get all this stuff organized. So I know that these are clearly the foundation pieces because the bricks go horizontal here. And these are for the parts in front of the porch. So they each get a front, a back, and then the two sides. So here's a front, back, and two sides. Front, back, and two sides. And same for the columns. You've got a back, a side,
a back, a side. So this is the back, this is the front, the back and the front. They each get one of these pieces. One, the openings go left, one, the openings go right, and then there's another piece. So there's really 3 pieces that are the same for each one. The only difference is this thin piece here on the right. And don't worry about these for now. These will help build the columns. Okay, so we're going to be building the left and the right columns. So there are actually 4 pieces per column. So we're just going to move this out of the way, work on one. One is the left, one is the right. So flip this over. There's a notch there, so it should help you match up the correct pieces. So we'll get a little bit of glue on there. And I use the tweezers, and then I use my little pincher squaring tool. What I do is I also put there like that. I put that down to make sure I push it down. And you should have a nice piece like that. We do the same for the other one. So we'll get a little glue on there. And push these 2 together as well. And there you have it. So you have a left and a right. Now we're going to do the same thing for the back and the other side. For each, just push those together. So you do this for both of them, and you should have 2 pieces that look like this. Okay, so now you've got a couple pieces, and you're wondering, what's this centerpiece for? Well, if you just put a touch of glue just on the inside here, just one little piece will do, and stick it on the back of the column piece, that'll create a little ridge right in here. And that ridge is exactly the thickness of the thinner piece right here that'll go on there. So glue up the edge of that thinner piece, and then what you'll do is you'll just put this right on the edge there, flop it over, and that should come together perfectly. It prevents this piece from being pushed over too far or not far enough. It gives you a nice square look to the column. Okay, so as you can see, I did not use that centerpiece, but what you're going to want to do is you're just going to want to glue up those end pieces, square it off so it's nice and square. Do the same for the other column, and you should have 2 that look like that. Okay, now we're going to work on the chimney. Building the chimney is very similar to building the columns, which we just did. We have a long piece and a shorter piece that get connected by the 2 side pieces. So what we're going to do is we're simply going to glue the long piece on the longer piece as such, and then we'll do the same for the shorter piece. Just try and push that down, make sure everything's nice and square. So that's one side, and now we're doing the other side. And we're not going to put the top on this one. When you're done, you should have 2 pieces that look just like this. Then we'll marry those 2 together like so. A little glue on the ends. And we're just trying to get all the brick pieces together. So we're not going to put the top on this just yet. We're getting ready to paint everything, all the brick pieces, red. So when you're done, you should have a nice squared off brick chimney. Looks like this. Okay, now we're going to create the 2 pieces of brick for either side of the stairs on the front porch. It's made up of 4 pieces. This little piece is actually the front or the back. I'll say this one's the front, and if you see, there are little lines cut in on the edges that make it look like the brick actually wraps around. So we're going to build 2 of these. So there's 4 pieces each. So just square that up. And then when we're done, we're going to glue these two pieces together for one of those two pieces. Okay, now that we have all the brick pieces constructed, we're going to take all the pieces that have brick etched in them, put the pieces that we created vertically so they can get sprayed on both sides with some red spray paint, and take that outside. I put it on some tape so it doesn't all blow away, and we'll be good to go to the next step. Okay, so while those pieces are drying, we're going to paint the doors and windows. For the doors, I use a wood stain. I also do this for the floor on the porch. So just add a little of that. And what we're going to need to do, since we don't want everything painted and I don't want to take the windows out of this panel yet, I'm going to, first I'm going to use the spray paint. It's a dark charcoal in keeping with the color scheme of what I had. But I need to cover up these other pieces. So I'm simply going to do that with some masking tape so I can take this outside and just spray paint the windows and leave everything else blank. Now I've given this a day to dry, so it's nice and dry, and these are all the painted brick pieces. So what we want to do is we want to call out some of the brick by putting what looks like mortar between those bricks. The etched lines, I put this in there so it's a joint compound. So I just take a little dab of that, and in a circular motion, just sort of quickly rub that back and forth. So you do that on, this happens to be the front part of the porch, so there's bricks on each side, but not in the middle. So I just rub that on there. And then this actually has some of the brick on the edge as well, those lines we talked about. So I put some of that on there. And once that's on there, again, don't let it dry. You need to wipe that off pretty quickly. So just take a napkin or a tissue paper towel, something like that. Just rub it off. And the compound, joint compound, stays in the grooves that we have for the bricks. Okay, so there you can see a little bit of that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a damp cloth and wipe off some of the excess. So this is just damp. I wipe that down, both sides, do the edges as well. And this works well. There you go. You can see the bricks. This works well since we used enamel paint on this. Since this joint compound is water-based, it's not likely to be absorbed into the wood, so it's easier to wipe off. So we're just going to finish up doing all these pieces, rub them all down, and then you can put those aside when they're done, and we will clean those up in the next step. Okay, so in this step, all we do is take an X-Acto knife and sort of scrape off some of the residual stuff in the windows so the windows fit nicely. It's pretty easy. And just use a wet rag and, just wipe them down. It's a pretty easy step. Just make them look as clean as you want them to look. Okay, now that the windows are done, I'm just going to remove the masking tape, and then we're going to break out the windows. So they're each held in by a little tab. So simply flip this over and start pushing them out. Try not to push them out through the center of the window. We don't want you to break the window itself. So I'll just go through, knock out the windows. And this is the first wall piece and a side piece. So we're going to put those aside, sand down the windows, little tabs on those. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this foundation piece, start with that. It's all been cleaned up. And I'm going to take the window. I'm going to flip this over and put these windows in from the inside out. So just put a little dab of glue on there. Make sure the front painted portion of the window is face down. I just put that on there. Slide it over. And press it in. Again, press it in on the edges so you don't break the window itself. And there you go. You'll have a nice clean look. Okay. So I just continue to put the windows on, both in the foundation, one piece at a time. And you'll notice the foundation is actually, both pieces look a little different. The windows don't actually line up. So I'll show you that in a moment. But continue to put the windows in based on the directions that we have. Again, paint side down. And there you go. Okay, now we're going to glue this foundation piece onto the wall now that the windows are in. So we're going to want to make sure we have a nice clean surface. So just sand both the bottom of the wall and the top of the foundation off. Just some light sanding will do. Okay. Add a little touch of glue. What I look for is I want the windows to be a little bit on the top of the foundation. They're not squarely in the middle or in the center there. So put this piece down, put both pieces down. Make sure you have your little squaring guides I included, those little triangles. Okay. And just a little bit of glue. Make sure you don't put a big glob in there. Otherwise, when you go to wipe it off like this, you'll have glue all over the wall. So just flip this little squaring piece over and give it a little shove from the back just to make sure that's all squared up. Push down. Again, rub a little bit of the excess glue off. And there you have it. So what I would recommend is just flip this over and put a book or something heavy on this and leave it overnight or leave it for several hours so that it dries nice and flat. And we'll go on to the next one. Okay, so just repeat this process for the other wall. Break it out, sand it up, glue in the windows. Remember, do them from the inside out. And then you'll add the foundation piece. Okay, not too much glue, square it up, and there you go. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing for the other pieces, but first, the front wall and the rear wall will have their edges exposed, so we're going to want to put a little dab of paint on the edge of those pieces before we put that on. The foundational piece for the front wall is not painted. You're not going to see that, but it has a couple tabs in there, and this is where the front porch floor will slide in. So we'll just get a little glue on this. Okay, just smear that around. Use our squares. Push that together tightly. Make sure you wipe off the glue. And do the same for the rear wall. Just sand that up, glue it up, and once again square these pieces so they're completely level with each other. That's good. And then we're going to do the same for the bump out. There is a foundation piece on that piece plus the two side pieces that go with that. And then finally, the piece that goes in the back, it's for the probably the back porch, if you would, does not have a foundation piece, so that we can just leave that as is. Okay, so once all the foundations are put on all the walls, I just lay them all on a hard surface, something flat, and then I put a nice heavy book on it and let it dry. Make sure it's nice and flat overnight. Okay, now we're going to build the back portion. This up here, the spot at the bottom should be a little bit wider than at the top. That way the stairs will line up perfectly. So we're going to just add in the door. Remember, add it from the rear. And then we're going to add on the side pieces. So you put the short piece on, and you make sure that that's on the inside of the wall. So it's the short piece on the inside of the wall. So I put the short piece down, and then I put the back wall on. Press those together, make sure you push down, everything's nice and square. Do the same thing with the other short end. Put that down on the mat, and then make sure you go around and square that so all the pieces line up nice and square. There you go. Okay, now we're going to build the stairway for the front. There are 6 stairs here. There's 4 for the front and 2 for the back. There should be a scoring line etched in here. So I'm just going to rub my X-Acto over that. Break out the stair pieces and the risers, front and back. Okay, file them down so they're nice and clean edged. And you could do this step now. Actually, you probably should have done this step beforehand, but I put the stain on those, and then glue the risers to the piece that says back porch. Those go on the side. Okay, so when you're done, you should have a piece that looks like that. Now we will add the stairs on here. So just put some glue on the risers. Add these in individually. And you can use these triangles to make sure you push them down nice and flat. Line them all up. And this makes sure it's nice and even on the side. So you should have a piece that looks like this. Okay. Now I've glued those side pieces on that we created. So those go flush up against the back. So put a little glue on the side of the stairs, push those in, and it's important to make sure that the back is all level because we need a nice flat surface to glue that to the porch. So when you're done, you'll have a piece that looks like that, and we'll add the top of those stair pieces on later. Okay, now we're going to do the bottom and the sides of the porch. There are some grooves cut in. Just flip this over. We will use those grooves as guides from the inside. But first, we need to paint this the same color as the rest of the house. I just usually leave a little spot in the center. Make sure you get inside the framing there. But that little spot in the center should help hold these stairs once we glue them on. And then, of course, I just do the porch floor, little stain. This is the top of the porch. So make sure that the etched lines are on the outside, and you will glue these 2 short pieces on the inside of the longer piece. So just get a little glue on there, tip it on the flat portion, and stick those 2 pieces together. Square it off, make sure it dries. This is the trim. I've already painted this white, so I'm just going to put my inserts and the railings on a piece of tape, put that aside so I can tape that in a moment. And then this is the little columns for the porch that hold the railing. So just sand those off. These have a front and a back. So there's a notch cut in to 2 of them. So make sure you have a blank one and one with notches. And just put a little dab of glue on the one that does not have notches on it. And then we will just stick those together. So it's really the thickness of 2 pieces of wood make up 1 post. So we'll just get our little squaring tool, make sure they're all nice and even. So the point here is to make it look like it's 1 piece of wood. And we will put the cap on there, the flat cap, in a different step. But for now, we'll just do that. And when you're done, you'll have two pieces, one with notches on the left, one with notches on the right. And the railing for the porch will go into one of those. Okay. Now, I just pull off all the trim pieces and sand them down and make sure I'm putting them where they're supposed to go. Just look at the directions. The directions will say where each one of these go. But just to make sure I have everything covered. One thing you don't want to do at this stage is put the front door framing on. And we don't want that to actually go below the yellow portion or the siding, because it will interfere with the porch floor once we put that on. So you might want to just put that aside. I'm just going through, making sure I've got a window for each one of these. Now this is the last window. That actually goes on the dormer. So there's the dormer piece, which we have not dealt with yet. And we're going to put that in on a different step. But you can just take that off, set that aside. I'll show you the window. Here's what the window will look like, and then the framing. So the window will get pushed in through the back, and then that's the framing. So just put that aside for now. And then the door frames. The door frames, there are actually two door frames, one for the front door, one for the back door. The one for the front door is a little bit longer. That is this piece. And then the one for the back door is a little bit shorter. So just put them side by side so you can tell which goes where. And again, don't put the one around the front door just yet, because we don't want that to interfere with the assembly of the porch once we stick it on the front wall there. Okay, so now you know where all the trim pieces go. So we will just start putting a little dab of glue. You don't need much glue at all. I put a thin ribbon of glue on a piece of tape here, and then I just lightly dab each trim piece in that glue, just really on the corners is pretty much all you need. And put those on. Each one fits around the window opening perfectly. So continue to do that for all of these. Okay, now that we've put all the walls together, time to actually glue this up and make it look like a house. So I'm going to start with the back wall. The back wall goes on the outside and the side walls go on the inside of the back wall, if that makes sense. So there's a bit of an overlap. So just put the side wall down. I'll put a little glue on the edge here. And just put that down on the mat, and then you push the back wall up. And it's very important to do it this way. You can't do it the other way where the back wall is on the inside. The back wall and the front wall have to be on the outside so that everything comes together. So I use these little squares, different ways to use them to square this up. Okay, might take a little finessing, but here's a way to do it as well, nice and square. Okay, so just push, give that a little time to set up. And now I'm going to put the base in. So the base really keeps everything squared up as well. There's only one way to put the base in so that everything fits. And again, the outside portion needs to be for the front and back walls. Okay, so I put some glue on the top and the left piece of this. I push that in. So again, I use my squaring tool. Make sure I've got a nice connection there at the bottom. You can push this base down from inside as well so it remains flat, so that the bottoms of all three pieces are completely flat on the base. Okay. And now we can add the other side wall. So that again, that'll be on the inside of the back and the inside of the front. So we put a little glue on the base, a little glue on the portion that's going to touch the back wall. Now I put this in about 1/2 inch before I get to the back wall and slide it in. That way it gets some nice coverage on the wood. And then again, really torque that down. Okay, then turn this on the side just to make sure that you push that down and push it in. That way everything's all nice and square and even. So take your time doing this. Sometimes these walls flop around a little bit. You might get some excess glue sticking out on the areas where the walls come together. Just make sure you wipe that off. Okay, and now we're going to put on the front. The front has these 2 notches at the top that will go in right up here like this. Okay. All right, so we're just going to glue the inside there, the base and the 2 side walls, and a little touch of glue on the inside of those notches. And then push that in so that the notches meet up with the overhang of the side walls. Make sure it's all nice and level. So here's a good way to use these squares. Gets in there nicely. Oh, that just popped out, which is fine. We're just going to flip this over. And after this step, you'll see you have a house coming along. So again, it's important that these walls line up the way they're supposed to. You put them on so that the front and the back walls are on the outside and the side walls are on the inside of this square. So when you look at the house from the front, you should not see any seams at all. If you look at the house from the back, you should not see any seams at all. It's only when you look at the house on the side. So I'm just going to wipe off a little bit of glue here. I just use a thin layer of glue just so it's not oozing out all over the place. Dries clear. Okay, there you have it. Looks like we're building a house now. Okay, now we're going to build the side bump out. So we need to attach these on the outside of the wall. So I'm going to put a little dab of glue on the wall itself, put that flat, and attach the side pieces. Okay, push it in snug. Make sure it's level on the bottom. And again, these side pieces will be seen from the front or the back, and you will not see a seam. Now do the other side. There you go. Okay, now we're going to take the clear plastic I provided. I'm going to cut this into some strips. It takes 4 or 5 cuts to make sure it goes all the way through. You don't want to tear this. And we're going to use pieces just big enough to cover the window openings. So you can use your X-Acto knife or razor blade. In this case, I used the scissors. cut a large enough portion to cover up the window openings. And I'm just going to put a little dab of glue on the wall itself, far enough away from the window opening so that when I press this down, it doesn't flatten out and cover up the window itself. So there you go. I've done all the other windows. I used one larger piece here on the inside, just as a shortcut. And there you go. Now we're going to build the porch base. So we take these painted inserts, put a little strip of glue down, and I'm going to put these, attach these. There's a little etching there as a guide to where they go to keep them centered. So just glue up the painted side on a few of the edges. Put that down, adjust it so it's nicely centered. And we'll do the same for the side pieces. So just move them around before the glue dries, just so you have a nice centered look. There you go. Now we're going to glue those on to the bottom of the porch floor. So this piece goes on the shorter end, and this goes on the edges. So put a little glue on the front wall portion. Square that up. And then we'll do the same for the sides. So make sure that is pushed flush so that when we put this on the front wall, it'll go in flush with the front wall. Now I'm going to take there's 5 pieces. There's the cap for the chimney, the cap for the front stairs, and the caps for the front columns. So sand those off, put those on a piece of paper, use some concrete looking paint. In this case I used a dark charcoal as well. Take those outside. Okay, so now we're going to attach these railings to the column. And as you can see or not see, the top piece is a little bit longer. So I see that angle. So that piece will fit nicely in the column. So you need to make sure that the notches are in the back, and we'll slide that in and everything will fit flat on the surface. So you have a nice horizontal look to the railing itself. So just get a touch of glue, put a dab on each one of these pieces. Maybe a little too much there. And then put these flat down and simply slide that in to the column, and you'll have a nice horizontal look. Okay. So this one is the left railing for the porch. This one is the right railing. So simply glue those up. And I actually glued the caps on these before I took them out to paint them. But make sure this is nice and flat. Okay, just as a precursor, before we paint the porch railing columns and the railings themselves, I just want to show you where these will go. There are the 2 holes on the back of each side of the column. And then there are some notches on the side of the column. So this is where the porch railing will stick inside those 2 notches. Okay. That'll go here and everything should line up. The column should be flush or flat on the porch. And I do this before I paint, I just want to make sure I take a pin or the X-Acto knife and poke through those holes. Be kind of gentle so you don't break the railing, but just gingerly move this back and forth until that fits in. Okay. That's where these will go. But I'm going to take those apart and I'm going to paint those as well as the other side of the two other railing portions. So I'm just going to flip those over. Grab some masking tape. Put these on vertically so I can get both sides and take those outside and paint them. There you go. Okay, now we're going to add the columns and the railings to the front porch. So we've got two shorter railings and two of the longer ones with the columns attached. So those are nice and flat. And we're going to take these brick columns. There are holes in the back. They're centered. And there are holes on the sides for where the railing will fit in. So make sure you have a left and a right. The center holes go in the back, and there should be a left and a right hole to accommodate these railings. So we're going to take this first one off and just try and push that in. Make sure it's going to fit before you glue it up. I put a dab of glue on there, and this is right at the edge at the top. So we'll stick that in, work it around, make sure it's nice and level. There you go. And we'll do the same thing to the other side. A little dab of glue. And that should be the back of the column, towards the back of the right side. Again, just push that in. And it'll look like this. So there you go. We have a left and a right. And now we're going to glue the column onto the porch itself. So put a little dab of glue on both these sides. And when I put these on, I actually start a little bit at the top. Put a little dab of glue at the bottom of the railing column as well, because that's going to fit flat on the porch floor. So I start with my column a little bit higher, a little higher up, and then I simply push it down. That way when the glue smears down, it won't disrupt what my bricks look like. Okay. Line that up so it's nice and square. Just push it in this way and this way. And then just simply push down on that railing column. Okay, nice and square. We do the same thing to the other side. A little dab of glue there. Start high, push down. And there you go. So just make sure it's all nice and level, all nice and square. And when we're done, we'll have a piece that looks like this. Okay, now I'm going to take those caps I painted. There are two caps for these columns. So simply put a little bit of glue on there. If the cap doesn't fit perfectly flat, you might need to do a little sanding on the top of the column. So just make sure that that's on there with a little overhang, the same on all sides, so it should look like that. Okay, now we're going to put the other railing on. So this will go in the center. There are 2 holes here in the wall. So those holes will go, I'm sorry, these pegs will go in those holes. So a little touch of glue on the first one. I just turn this on the side. Put that in. There is no up or down on these. They're pretty symmetrical. So I push that in. However, when you push this in, make sure there's just a little bit of an overhang on the end of the porch floor, because that's what's going to plug into the wall. Okay, so in and out. A little bit of an overhang, just like this. Make sure it's nice and level with the porch floor. And I do the same to the other side. Again, a little bit of an overhang so we can plug that into the front wall. Just make sure all that's level and put it aside. Okay, now we're simply going to attach these caps onto the bricks on either side of the stairs for the front porch. So a little dab of glue on each side. And what we want to do is we want to line these up so that it's all flat and level on the back. Okay, so just put it on its back and push those together so it's all flat back there, because this is going to get glued to the front porch. And we want a nice flat, even back. So there you go. Okay, now we're going to work on the roof. So after you break this free from the panel, this inside edge, the bottom edge on each piece needs to be sanded down so these can go together a little better. So it's the same on the dormer roof as well. It's this edge, the bottom edge. So we've etched lines in where the tiles or the shingles will go. So just flip that over, shingle side, etching lines down, and then simply sand that off. You don't have to do a lot of sanding. It doesn't have to be perfect. It should not be 45 degrees. This is not a 45-degree angle roof, so just get enough off of there so that the pieces will come together. You do the same for the dormer pieces as well. And finally, the piece that goes over, I believe it's the dining room. It's the bump out. Now you'll get these tiny little pieces. They have a little bit of a point on them. One side is straight and flat. The other side has a point to it. So we're going to want to put those on the roof in these little grooves. So simply turn this over. I just run some glue on there, rub my finger across so the glue gets in there. And then you're going to want to take this piece, hold it by the pointy side. Okay, there's the point. And then you turn it so that the point is on the top. Okay? And just slide it in. The glue will hold that down. It'll be flat on the top part. There again. Make sure the point is on the top. Flat part in the back. And continue to do this for all of these. Just push them down. Now and again. And you'd be surprised at how many of these I put in the wrong way and pulled them out. So checking, there you go. Flip that over. I use my squaring tool once I'm done. Make sure it's all level, all even. And up, there's one that I did not put in correctly. So before the glue dries, I'm simply pulling that out like pulling a tooth and sticking it back in. Put that flat down. Again, straighten them out. So this will give the appearance appearance of exposed rafters coming off the front roof. So we're going to do that to all of the pieces. So this is the same for the part of the roof that goes in the back. Same thing. Knock those in. And then for the bump out roof as well. This just keeps everything all lined up. And there you have it. This is what they should all look like. In this step, we're going to glue the roof together. Now that we have those false rafters put on the front. So just turn these over so that the etched lines are on the bottom. And then we're just going to glue it like that. And to make sure that we have the angle right, we're going to use these braces. So there should be 3 braces. So first things first, just put some glue on one end. Push those together. I use the squaring tool just to make sure they're lined up correctly. And then you'll see some notches, or you'll actually see some dotted lines. Do not put glue on the pointy end of that dotted line. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But put the first one on squarely in the middle. And then when you attach the other 2 braces, make sure they're about an inch away or so from the edge. We don't want them interfering with the wall when we put this on top of the walls themselves. Now the reason I have those notches there is once this dries, we can break those out in case there is a little bit of cupping or warping on the wall. And there you go. Set that aside to dry. Okay, before we can build or put this angle on the dormer roof, we actually need to put the dormer together. We will use the dormer wall as the brace so that the roof dries at the correct angle. So trim these pieces off, do a little sanding, and the dormer wall with the window, this opening, this piece, remember that faces the front, so you should not see any seams. You only see the seams from the side. And because you see the seams from the side, you may want to, after this is glued up, put a dab of paint on the exposed end, just to clean that up a little. So just use your squaring tool. Make sure that's nice and tight. Do one side, then you can do the other. And then we'll set this aside for a few moments to dry. So there you go. And like I said, we can clean up or touch up a little paint on those edges. Okay, now we're going to add these barge boards on the end of the roof. It's the longer pieces here. So simply break those out. Be careful not to break them in half. So just simply pull those out. They're exactly the same, whether they're left or right, does not matter. They're symmetrical. So just take your roof. So one goes on one side, one goes on the other. Pretty straightforward. The thing is, you really want to make sure that when you glue them on, which we'll do in a moment here, we want to make sure that they're level with the top of the roof. Okay, so I simply put a little bit of glue on one end, put the roof down, and then put this barge board right up against it. Okay. and then push the roof down to make sure it's flat. Just flip it and do the same thing with the other side. Just make sure you push them both down. So here's how I did it. I just kept pushing it down, pushing it in, pushing it down, pushing it in till it's dried up a bit. Okay? And then you just do the same to the other side. And then to make sure that it dries level, I took a ruler and added some bottles of paint just as a weight and let that dry overnight. There you go. Okay, now I'm just going to add the 2 remaining barge boards on the shorter end of the back roof. Just put those on. Be careful not to break the end points. I did add an extra one of these in there in case that happens. And then just as a follow-up, I'm just going to lightly dab the exposed ends to the dormer as well as the bump out. So quick paint, and now I'm going to add the window to the dormer wall. And again, just put that down there and push it in from inside out. There you go. And I'm going to add the trim around this particular piece. It's easier to do it now than when it's actually on the roof. And then when that's done, I just flip it over, cut out a piece of acrylic, and put that in for the window. Okay, there you go. So now we're going to glue the dormer roof together. So you'll see there's 3 little triangles. So we're going to glue these together so we make a nice thick support with the right angles. So just glue those together, tighten them up nicely. Okay. And then a little dab of glue on the edge of the roof. Place these etched side down so the lines are facing the mat. Square it up a little bit. And then I'm just going to put a little dab of glue on the support. Stick that in there. And I'm going to use that to make sure I've got the right angle for this particular dormer roof. Then when I'm done, I just take my squaring tools and I put them on either side so it dries without falling apart. There you go. Okay, now I'm just going to glue the 2 remaining barge boards on the bump out roof. Pretty simple, straightforward step. So just glue those up, square them up, and you're good to go. Okay, because I painted the side walls with an acrylic paint, we got a little bit of warping at the top. And I have a solution for that. If that is to occur, there is a beam that we cut that you can put right there in the center on top between the window and the pointed portion of the walls. So simply put a little bit of glue on there. Stick that in there and then hold it until it starts to dry up. Make sure it's sticking. And then what I typically do is just turn this on its side and put a little bit of weight like the paint bottle on here, which you'll see in a moment. But what this will cause is an issue with we won't be able to stick the roof on the way it is now because those roof supports will be in the way. So just tip that over, give that 10 minutes or so to dry. And these dotted lines here, we're going to cut out a notch in the center. So if you had glued these up properly, you did not put glue on the center pieces, you can simply take an X-Acto knife, follow the dotted line straight down. Should go through fairly easily, and those pop out without a problem, and they will not affect the angle of the roof at all. This way the roof will be able to fit on there nicely, and we can accommodate that beam to keep everything square. So now before we paint the underside of each roof, we're going to have to tape this off, and we want to make sure that we have a clean surface so that the shingles can stick to those. So I'm just going to put a little bit of masking tape on the top portion of each one of these, and where the rafters are sticking out, I just want to make sure those are sticking out and I don't cover them up completely on the top, because I do want a little bit of trim paint color on those. And because we'll be painting the front portion right here, I just trim off that paint. Trim off that tape so the paint will get in there nicely. And do the same with this. See, just have those exposed. And don't push down too hard with this because you might break the little notches on the end. So just do that. And then I use a thicker piece of tape for the center. And then I can go outside, flip these over, and then paint the edges, the underside edges. Okay, now we're going to add the shingles onto the house. I kept mine in a book, nice and flat. So just take these. I cut off the ends just to free up every individual piece. And we're going to put this on the roof, but I'm going to place the roof on the building itself so I don't break the barge boards. And when we're done, we'll cut off the overlap with a sharp X-Acto knife. That'll give us a nice clean look. So just take the first one, put some glue right on those pieces, those exposed rafters that are coming out, and then use the guidelines that we have etched into the wood and put the top piece of each row of shingles right up against that top piece, and they should all overlap just perfectly. So a little overlap, and when you put these on, just make sure that the lines are look like shingles, so you just stagger that a little bit. Okay, so takes a little while. Just make sure everything's nice and level. Last piece, and then I do the other side as well. But before I do that, you're going to want to put this flat, because there's a lot of glue in that, or there's a lot of water in that glue. So I put that on there, let that dry overnight so the roof remains flat, doesn't warp. Okay, then you just do the same thing with the other side. Put that on there, let it dry. And then to get the actual top portion, I just cut off an edge without the shingle look. I put a dot about in the center. I flip that over so it's paint side down. And then just with one slice, don't press down too hard. What we want to do is we want to put a fold in this without ripping it all the way through. So just keeping the ruler down, just pull that up to get it started. And then you just press the edges together till you get a nice look, and that'll go right here on top. Okay, so now that this is all dried up, using a very sharp X-Acto knife, use 6 or 7 lighter cuts so you don't rip the shingles off the roof, and you should get a nice clean look on each edge. So go around the entire roof. Again, 6 or 7 cuts. Don't try and do it all in one cut. because you might rip the shingle right off the roof. Okay. One last side. Okay, there you go. Looks nice and neat. Now I'm just going to glue this top piece on. You could have done that beforehand, but I'm just going to do it now, and then I'll trim that off after it dries. And just push this down, kind of teeter-totter the roof a little bit. Make sure you get a nice, even piece with the glue. Now we're just going to do the remaining two roof pieces, one for the dormer and one for the bump out. Again, let it dry. I'm just going to trim this off. And then we're going to put these other rafters on there. So I took the liberty of taking those off. I put them on a piece of tape with the ends exposed, because that's what's going to be exposed, and painted it from the top as well as the bottom. So just take those off. I use the tweezers. It's a pretty small piece. And these will go right in these notches that are in the barge boards. And they're already painted. So just go through, make sure you're pushing them in at the angle that's provided by it's called the bird mouth notch inside the barge board. Okay, so it's sticking out maybe 1/8 of an inch. It's sticking out a little bit, just like the real thing would. Just adjust that a little bit. Pull it out a little more. And make sure it's flat, level with the roof. Okay, so go through. There you go. There's the 3 on one end, plus the 1 in the center. And it gives a nice clean look. I use my squaring tool just to make sure they're all sticking out about the right length. And then we'll do the same for the dormer roof. Square that up, gives it a nice clean look. Okay, now we're going to build the piece that goes over the porch. So there's a flat side, and then there is the piece that has the angle. The piece that's angled goes facing down. So I'm just going to flip the house over, and I'm going to put it on the flat end, glue that on the 2 pieces of the wall sticking out. So just get a little glue in there. Make sure you get it all the way into the edge. And if you had glued this up correctly, it should fit perfectly. Okay. So there you go. Okay, now we're going to take this porch support and flip the house over, and you'll see there's a little bit of a 45-degree angle on each one of these. Each piece is exactly the same. So you want 2 pieces on the front, 2 of the porch supports showing in the front, and 2 on each side. So I just line that up. Put that on there. There you go. So I put this on this piece instead of putting it on the column itself, because I know it's going to be lined up perfectly here. There you go. Looks pretty good.
And then when I trim off the shingles for the dormer, I leave about 1/4 of an inch just so that it gives the appearance, and there's not a big gap, gives the appearance that the shingles go all the way to the roof once you put this on. And then just glue the glue the wall in. And I push that up right up against the little pieces that we put on earlier. So it looks like little rafters. Push that up in the front a little bit. It should all line up nicely. And when you put the porch on, there's these little pieces that we had sticking out. Those will go in these holes. And there's also a little notch there on the floor of the porch. So what I would do is I would try and put this on 3 or 4 times just to make sure it fits, things are lined up, and make sure that the holes are clear. So this was the last time I put this on. Again, I tried doing this 3 or 4 times, and everything should just line up like that. You should not have any gaps on these edges. So when you're ready, put a little glue on there, make sure it lined up nicely. Okay, we don't want too much glue oozing out on the sides. And since we've done this 3 or 4 times already, we know that it should fit in nicely and everything should be lined up. And because I didn't want a little bit of glue smeared on the top of my columns, I did not glue the porch to the porch supports on the top. They should sit down there nicely. There's really no need to glue them. Okay, make sure there's no glue on the side. Give it some pressure. All right, now we're going to glue on the bump out. So put a little glue on the bump out, and there are some lines etched into the wall. We want to make sure that we are at least lined up with the lines that are etched into the wall, because when we put the trim on, the trim is cut so that it goes right up to that bump out without having to trim up many pieces. So just put that flat, make sure it's all lined up on the bottom. And then I do the same for the back. There are no guidelines on the back, so you're just going to have to eyeball this to make sure it's pretty much in the center. Just use those windows. Put it down flat. Press both pieces down. Make sure it's nice and flat. And there you go. Now I'm going to add the roof onto the bump out. So I put a little glue on the bump out walls. Push that in there. Center it. Again, just eyeball it so it's centered properly. Push it down and let that glue up. Dry up nicely. Okay. So this house is really coming along. That looks sweet. Now I'm going to add the dormer. I simply put some glue on the walls of the dormer, and it should line up fairly close. Not perfectly. It should have a little bit of an overhang to where the walls go up on the side. Just put that in the center. Try and make sure you get this as close to where you want it, because it's going to have glue on there. You don't want to be moving it around and put a lot of glue on the shingles themselves. Okay, there you go. It's looking like a house. Now I'm just going to add a little more of my stain onto these side pieces for the back porch stairs. There's probably an easier way to do this. Maybe turn the top board
upside down and glue these to it instead of gluing the boards on them. Your choice. And then once this is all glued up, you can simply glue it onto the back porch area right underneath the door, and it should line up perfectly. Not too high, not too low. Okay, so it should look something like this. Now I'm going to glue the front stairs on, and because this is all flat, I'm going to put some glue right in the middle so it doesn't ooze out. Give a little bit of pressure. Make sure you push it down so everything, there you go, so everything is level with the base. Okay, now we're going to add the exterior trim that goes between the siding and the brick. And the way I have this first piece, that's A, this is B, C, D, E, F, G, and then there's a long piece H that goes along the whole side there. So just cut these out or pull them off. There's that little tab which is going to need to be sanded. And if you put these on this way, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, there'll be a little bit of an overhang on B, which you'll see in a moment. But make sure it fits first. Put a little dab of glue, spread that out. Make sure you wipe the sides so you don't have glue sticking out. There you go. Gets a little sticky. I probably should have used my tweezers because I don't want glue fingerprints all over my house. And just stick that on there between those two. Should be nice and level. You can use the siding as a kind of a leveling guide yourself. And then I use the squaring tool just to push that down a little more, nice and evenly. There, that looks pretty sharp. Almost done. I just flip this on its back. I put on item number B. And as you see, that sticks out just a little bit. It sticks out the thickness of what the trim piece C will look like. I'm just putting my tweezers in the center there just so they line up nicely. Okay, so go along C, D, E, F, G, H. That'll go on nicely. And this is the last piece H, which goes from the front of the house to the back of the house. It's looking sweet. Okay, now to put the chimney on. I just tried to expose a little more wood. Center my chimney on there, the chimney top. Then you might want to sand the bottom off just a little bit. I put it on the right side just because I've seen a picture of it on the right, but you want to make sure that it's not right up against the edge of the roof because there's nothing underneath that. It would look a little weird. So just push that on there and congratulations. You finished the 1928 Sears Vallonia kit house. There you go. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you.